Here's a crazy story for you guys. China has detained an estimated 1 to 2 million Uyghur Muslims and are placing them into re-education camps that critics are calling internment camps, or are drawing the comparison and saying that they're very similar to internment camps. Now you might be wondering, who are the critics? Well, only the United Nations and Human Rights Watch. No big deal. Anyway, so the background on these people is that they're ethnically Turkic Muslims, and there's about 11 million of them living in the western region of China. So Turkic is essentially, it's a type of ethnicity. It's like a blanketed term. And a lot of them are in a place that's literally called Turkey. And a lot of them are also in more like Central Asia. So anyway, right now, it looks like the majority of them live in an autonomous, air quote on autonomous, city called Xinjiang, which is heavily surveillanced, and 1 to 2 million Uyghurs live in the internment camp nearby. So what is that, about 11 million minus 2? So that's what, 9 million of them or so? 9 to 10 million living in Xinjiang, which is heavily surveillanced, and then the rest are in that internment camp area. Xinjiang is also pretty big, by the way. It's not just like a tiny autonomous city, kind of like Hong Kong, that's packed full of people. It's very vast. Moving forward, according to Human Rights Watch in the United Nations, China considers religious observance, so in this case, Islam with the Uyghurs, as terrorism, which was followed by mass detentions of people without due process, and they began forcing Uyghurs to take biological tests to collect their data, including their ethnic roots and countries of origin. What? Like, you're collecting people's biological data? How does that work? Why are you using this? Well, I do have an answer, actually. Now, what China is trying to prove is whether or not the people who are Muslim Uyghurs are part of 26 different sensitive countries, if their biological roots are stemmed into those countries. That's what they're trying to figure out. And that's why the 1 to 2 million Uyghurs are currently in internment camps, because they belong to one of the 26 different countries of origin. All right, so now the question that we have is, like, what is considered a sensitive country? Well, I'll name a few, and then let's guess as to what their commonalities are with the Muslim Uyghurs. So Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey. Would you like to know what they all have in common? They're all Muslim. That is not a good look. That is not a good look, China. Side rant, this is quite literally what Islamist extremists claims the world thinks of Muslims, and then they use this as ammo in order to try and get more people recruited. This is kind of like my actual area of study. I know I kind of like branch off here and there in different videos, but studying extremism is really at the heart of my area of study in my pursuit of an eventual PhD one of these days. Now, while we're on the topic of extremism, so Muslims claim that they are in fact internationally targeted. Well, it looks like in this case, it's actually the case. Granted, the extremists don't mention like all the other groups around the world that are also being targeted because it doesn't fit their narrative, but nonetheless, this is not a good look, China. The question that we now have to ask ourselves is, why does China even care about this population? Well, there's a couple reasons. The overarching reason is because China has something called a China One policy. What that essentially means is that China is trying to take over autonomous cities, or essentially little cities that more or less govern themselves, and try to take them into China itself. However, this isn't one of those situations where it's like, hey guys, we're gonna accept your culture, just come in and join our country, those sorts of deals. This is more like, guys, you literally have to drop your ethnic roots, your cultural background, forget about everything, and literally try to blend into Chinese culture. So let me continue with this. The area where the Muslim Uyghurs live, Xinjiang, so it turns out that the ethnic majority in China, the Huns, are actually moving into this land, and that's causing a lot of the unrest. And so therefore, China is literally forcing the Uyghurs to learn Mandarin, renounce their faith, and swear loyalty to President Xi Jinping, or Xi Jinping. I think that's how you say it. If anybody here knows Mandarin, please let me know. Now, if they don't, what happens is that they're continually placed in internment camps, which, I mean, your guess is literally as good as mine about like what that's even like, because you're not allowed to have international inspectors into these areas within China. So literally your guess is as good as mine. In addition to all of that, they're forced to deal with facial recognition cameras. They're forced to have codes on their doors so authorities even know who's inside. And so they literally can walk up to somebody's door, scan the code, and then figure out which specific people are inside and whether or not that they match the 26 sensitive countries and whether or not they're going to be placed in internment camps. Now, right now, no government has even stepped up to try to challenge China, even the United States. And we literally even have something that's called the Congressional Committee on China. And they have urged President Trump to try to make moves to stop this horrible treatment happening. But so far, nothing has happened. And that's what's very unfortunate about this story. All I have to say is, America, guys, what the hell? Our government is literally saying, oh, we support democracy abroad, we're the world police force, but yet there's 11 million people who are being targeted because of their cultural background. I thought the point was to have a trade war with China, but we're not helping literally 11 million Muslim Uyghurs, which I might have said it. It's because maybe they're Muslim, just saying. In China, all I have to say to you is that you are very literally on the wrong side of history. That is all. All right, guys, let's have a conversation about US and Chinese relations. The specific aspects that I want to talk about is technology and the military. And so this is going to be like part one, focusing specifically on technology, and then there's going to be a part two right after this focused on the military. The reason why I want to focus on these two aspects is because I feel like it's not really talked about, if ever. Like, I'm pretty sure most people don't know what's going on between the United States military and China. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But most of the time we hear about things like the trade war, and that's about it. So let's jump into technology and see what it's about. Now, to better understand this issue, let's focus specifically on like a case study. So let's focus on the Chinese company called Huawei and kind of like what we can learn from that issue at large. Now, the United States government claims that Huawei has been working with the Chinese government in order to steal Americans' information. However, there isn't a lot of evidence that's correlating the two. Although, there are a lot of things that are still making us think that this is in fact the case. For example, there are multiple vulnerabilities within the phone that makes it easy to hack, which, by the way, hacking Americans' information is definitely a hobby of the Chinese government. In addition to all of this as well, the owner of Huawei worked for the Chinese military. China also gave Huawei over the span of 10 years, $1 billion. Well, actually it's $1.6 billion. So the combination of the fact that the owner worked with the Chinese military at some point in time in his life, I think that was like his roots. And then you have the fact that the Chinese government has given Huawei over the last 10 years $1.6 billion. And then you add the increased vulnerabilities within the phone. It leads a lot of Americans and people internationally thinking that all of this is very much intentional in order to steal Americans' information. Now, the situation then escalated once the founder of Huawei, Ren Zhengfi, which I apologize if I butchered his name, I probably did, his daughter, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested in Canada at the request of the United States. The United States claims that Meng Wanzhou had allegedly helped Huawei dodge tariffs that the United States had placed in Iran. In addition to that too, there's a multiple other like random things that we're trying to charge her with, but that's very much unclear. Like, for example, attempted wire fraud. But that's like something that's coming out right now, so we will find out what happens. Now, up to this point, because of how much of a risk Huawei apparently poses, there's multiple countries that have actually banned Huawei products. For example, number one, obviously the United States. Number two, there's Great Britain. Then you have Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Japan, India, and Italy. So, needless to say, it's quite a cluster of a situation. Now, let's actually get into intellectual property theft. This is something that's very important because this is hitting American companies really hard. Now, according to executives who are a part of the CNBC Global CFO Council, now I get it, this is a very long and complicated title, especially when there's an acronym literally in the middle, but essentially it's a group of executives across the technological industry, and they manage a collective amount of $5 trillion in market value. Now, they're claiming that 1 in 5 companies in the United States have had intellectual property stolen. 70%, so that's 20% of them, 70% simply don't know whether or not their intellectual property has been stolen. That's pretty bad. Now, I get it. A lot of people hearing this is going to say, well, I don't really care about those people anyway because they're ripping off Americans by lying about their taxes and so on and so forth. Yeah, I get it. That's true. However, it is still a fun fact nonetheless. Anyway, so in 2019, at a G20 meeting, which is an international forum for governments and central banks, China issued a memo that set out 38 different punishments for violators, but critics claim that it's not really the fact that they just created all of these rules and regulations, it's the fact that there's a lack of enforcement about the regulations that are currently in place. So a couple of things that China wants to start imposing on their own companies is, number one, they're going to revoke financial support to those companies, and number two, they're going to designate these different companies to an international database that is viewable by foreign leaders. And so, for example, say I stole intellectual property and I was an executive, then my information will be put into an international database while foreign leaders will know that they can't work with me specifically. All right, that's a good idea. However, the problem is the fact that these things are not apparently enacted. Now, the issue as a whole has costed the United States between $225 billion and $600 billion annually. Damn, that's crazy. You know, once I started saying this story out loud, I'm starting to think that China was like the OG bootleggers, right? It's like any product that you want and you don't want to pay market value, I guess that's where all the products are coming from, which is China. Anyway, I thought you guys would find that story to be particularly interesting. All right, let's talk about the United States and Chinese relations specifically now with the US military. So this is the part 2. It's like a part 1 was earlier and the other video, and this is part 2, which is this video. According to the Military Times, which is literally the military's independent media outlet, here's what they said. Quote, while an announcement of a withdrawal of several thousand American troops from Afghanistan is expected soon by the White House, the Secretary of Defense wants to redeploy those forces to the Indo-Pacific region to confront China. Excuse me, what? The United States government is considering sending troops to the Indo-Pacific region to confront China? Okay. All right, guys. This is problematic. Let me give you a second quote. So the second quote is from the Secretary of Defense, Esper. Now this is what the dude says. I would like to go down to a lower number because I want to either bring those troops home so they can refit and retrain for other missions, or and be redeployed to the Indo-Pacific to face off our greatest challenge in terms of the great power competition that's vis-a-vis China. Oh, sweet Jesus, guys. He wants to go into the Indo-Pacific region in order to challenge China? Yeah, this is bad. This is real bad. So keep in mind that we're going to be challenging Russia and India at the same time then as well. And this is just in one mission. Let me put the military in perspective for you guys. At this moment, we have 800 military bases in 80 countries that we know of. We have troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Eastern Europe, and Africa. Speaking of Eastern Europe, we literally have troops in Poland and Ukraine. So they're challenging Russia on the west side, and now we're going to be trying to corner Russia on the east side as well. Sweet baby Jesus. Oh, and also, by the way, there's literally something that was just released called the Afghanistan Papers, where hundreds of US officials literally testified. They thought it was an internal document, and then it was leaked in a 3-year legal battle with the Washington Post. But anyway, hundreds of US officials directly in charge of the war-making process in Afghanistan had proven that they didn't have a goal and they didn't even know why they were there. Literally, one of the people who had testified was in charge of creating the Afghan policy for Bush and Obama. This individual, his name was literally 3-star General Douglas Lute. He had even said, if the American people knew the dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost. He's talking about the Americans that died. Now we want to challenge Russia, China, and India in the Indo-Pacific region? You know, I'm not a genie. However, I can make a forecast. I feel like this is going to be bad. All right, before I continually cast my judgment, let's hear them out a little bit more. So according to Army General and Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, the region is home to the 4 most populous countries in the world: China, India, the United States, and Indonesia, and it has the largest military forces in the world. The return of great power competition as a threat to the United States is played out in the Pacific, with China and Russia both trying to change the rules-based international order that has served the region so well. Another quote, it is the #1 regional priority for the United States military. So we're trying to get into another Cold War is what it sounds like. Now, I don't doubt that this region is important. However, this is a terrible idea because there is a give and there is a take to everything. If we have so many bases around the world and then we're also going to start on this region, we're practically trying to take over the world at this point, which, by the way, you can make the argument that we're trying, but like, what the hell are we trying to get out of this is the point. Because we're going to be going into a region that has the capacity to be able to balance us now. That is the problem. We're going to be challenged in this area. Let me tell you guys the full weight of what we're dealing with. According to the Defense Department, we'll be dealing with 61% of the world population, half of the world's megacities, and 7 of the top 15 US trading partners. So what is the point I'm trying to make here? Well, I'd actually be surprised if the biggest countries in the world, like Russia, China, India, if they don't try to balance the United States in this area, in this region. Well, actually globally as well, specifically China and Russia. That's what I'm focusing on right now. Now I get it, we invest more money than the next 10 militaries combined, and if we literally halved our budget, we would still have a bigger military than China, Russia, North Korea, Iraq, and Iran all at the same time. But nonetheless, guys, like, how much are we going to go until we continually exhaust ourselves to the point where we are literally going to collapse because of this military industry? That is the point I'm trying to make. The luxury that we're currently having is the fact that we're not being aggressively challenged on a global international military scale, but I think we might be pretty soon. Let's talk about a story that nobody wants to talk about. Chinese organ trafficking. Bet you didn't see that coming. Well, I guess unless you read the title to this video, that is. Now, I caught wind of this story during my time at the University of Oregon because there was these ladies that were handing out flyers probably every week or every other week, and the flyers were talking about Chinese organ trafficking. Originally, when I heard this story, I thought it was like some conspiracy theory, and I was very confused about it. However, because of these ladies, and they were from China, they literally came here and lived here and started to try to bring awareness to this issue, I decided to do some digging. So thank you, old Chinese ladies, for doing your part, and I shall do mine right now. So let's jump into it. According to NBC, the organs of members of marginalized groups detained in Chinese prison camps are being forcefully harvested, sometimes when patients are still alive, an international tribunal sitting in London has concluded. So pretty much what's going on is that there's this tribunal that launched this study about the Chinese organ harvesting industry. I read the study. If you would like to check it out, I have all my information in the description box below. But pretty much what happened is that the study conclusively said, yes, the Chinese government is literally helping this industry where they take organs from marginalized groups and they're selling these organs on the black market. And so what gets a little bit more twisted is how many victims are actually affected. So let me just stop you right here in this video and let me ask you, how many people do you think is affected by this? We're talking about the Chinese prison system, specifically with the minorities. 500 people a year? 1,000, 10,000, 50,000? What? Ready for this? 1.5 million people. It is $1 billion industry in China, and it is not being challenged right now. Now, in these cases too, it's nearly impossible to figure out exactly how many people have been affected by this. The reason is because the Chinese government is really good about concealing information from anybody who could probably help the situation. And so that's kind of why we're left a little stumped as to how many people, but we can say at least 1.5 million people, at very least. To ramp this story up even more, you might be wondering, why are they targeting minority groups? Well, number one, because they're the most vulnerable, and number two, it's the type of people in these minority groups. There's two that are primarily targeted. Number one, there's the Muslim Uyghurs, and number two, there's the Falun Gong people. Now, real quick on the Falun Gong, so essentially what it is it's a spiritual and movement practice meant to connect a person with their inner energy. It started to gain momentum into the 1990s before the Chinese government cracked down on it. And so the Chinese government labeled it originally as a heretical cult and banned the practice altogether. One reason why the Chinese Communist government likely banned the practice was because the Chinese government was supporting secularism, specifically focusing on science and economic development. And as opposed to in the West, where there's like a separation between church and state, but you have the ability to be able to practice your religion. And in China at that time, it was viewed as threatening to the Chinese government because there's a wave of support for something that isn't directly in line with the Chinese government's ideology. And so therefore they started to crack down. Now, going full circle back to my rhetorical question about why these minority groups are targeted, one potential reason is because of their clean diets. They don't drink, they eat cleanly. And so the organs are literally viewed as having a higher quality, and so they can sell them for more money. You know, there's times now where I feel like I'm just not shocked by things in life. And then I hear about things like this and it really takes me back. And I have to just sit back and I'm like, wow, it's impressive on how horrible that is. Like really, that is so bad considering the fact that this is through a government, especially the government that the United States is directly pairing with in the international trade economy. But anyway, I digress. What also makes this interesting is that in 2012, the Chinese government admitted to taking organs. However, they said that they had taken it from executed criminals and not from people who were alive, let alone people who were persecuted because of their religion, and then literally the organs were taken from them while they were alive. This was in fact the case, and they did die as a result of this. There's multiple reports on this by the United Nations and Human Rights Watch. So if you'd like to check it out, I have a lot of information on that in the description box below. China also said that they're going to phase out the practice in 5 years, and so they were apparently supposed to phase this out in 2017. However, the study that I had referred to earlier on in the episode, that was a study from 2019, so they're clearly still doing it. Here's where it gets even crazier. Let's jump into how China could actually stop a country from stepping in. And so I want to talk about rules and regulations on an international scale. I don't really want to talk about how China could, say, launch economic retaliation or shifts in regional balances of power against countries that try to fight back against them. Let's just focus specifically on international rules and regulations and how China is manipulating that system in order to make sure that they're not persecuted as a result. So China is a part of the United Nations Security Council, and pretty much what this means is that they are one of 5 countries that are permanently on the Security Council. Other countries kind of rotate through, so sometimes they are on the Security Council, and maybe a few years later they might be on the Security Council again. But essentially what this means is that they have veto power to stop resolutions. So this is the same thing that the United States does to make sure that we're not persecuted for crimes against humanity for the war in Iraq. This is what the Russians do, specifically in the Soviet Union. Even France and some of those other countries do it as well. And so this is what China is currently doing to make sure that they don't get punished. Pretty much what a country would have to do is that they would have to go through the Security Council, and then from that point onwards, they have to create a case and then send it to the International Criminal Court. However, if you are the United States, or if you're Russia, or if you're China, you can literally stop any sort of resolution. So if someone says, hey, I would like to launch an investigation against China, China could say, no, you're not. And then the other country would have to say, you're right, we're not. The end. However, I don't really give a shit. Let's talk about the specific human rights that China is violating. First things first, Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. It's kind of hard to have your security of person when you're getting your organs taken. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. It's kind of hard to do when you get your organs taken. Article 7, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Well, I mean, if you're a religious person getting your organs taken because of your religious affiliation, it's kind of hard to make the argument Article 7 doesn't in fact play some role into this. Now I could keep going, but I think we got the point here. The question that we now have to ask ourselves is, why would any sort of international body actually give a few countries the ability to be able to veto decisions that would affect them? Funny story for you guys, I had a fascinating conversation once with somebody who actually worked for the United Nations, and I asked them this very question. Here's literally what he said, quote, how else would you get powerful countries to agree to join a group with less powerful countries? Damn it, that's a good point. So starting in World War II, all the way back in the day, there was the countries that won the war and the countries that lost. Back in the day, it was more normal for countries, the most powerful countries, to impose themselves on the losers. So at that time when the United Nations was created, it was very difficult to try to get the most powerful countries to join a group with the less powerful countries. It's like, hey, we're like the popular kids in the corner, and you guys are all the losers who we just beat up. Why would we join a group with you? And that's where the incentives were created, which is United Nations Security Council for 5 different countries. Now, to be very clear, I don't support the fact that these countries have this type of perk because it defeats the point. Like, what is the point of a Security Council if you can't prosecute people who are on the Security Council? You can prosecute everybody else, but just not them? Like, how does that work? Especially considering the fact also that countries use their position within the Security Council to vow for other countries, like the United States with like Israel, for example, so they don't get convicted of war crimes. So I don't have a better position for you guys. I don't have a better like recommendation. I'm just letting you know that this is in fact the case. So what do? Spread information about this topic. That is all. Because a majority of the world doesn't even know that this issue exists. And you can't solve a problem if you don't know it exists. Have you guys heard about the issues going on in Hong Kong? Because I'm sure you have. However, do you know all the information about this? Specifically, why are they still protesting even if the bill that they're originally arguing has been scrapped? Well, that's what I'm about to talk about. So let's go all the way back to the bill and then let's just move forward into where we're at right now. Now, originally there was a bill. It was proposed by someone called Carrie Lam. She's the chief executive of Hong Kong, so pretty much like a president. They're an autonomous city, so that means that they like have some sort of self-governance, but at the same time they're under the Chinese banner. Now what the bill essentially was is that would allow China to extradite Hong Kong citizens to China to be prosecuted. So if they decide for one day, hey, you know what, this person is getting too powerful, they're kind of a threat to China, we're just gonna like blame something on them, extradite them to China and have them get prosecuted. That is the problem that we're running into right now. So all of this is exactly what ignited all the protests. And then in June, the bill was actually scrapped, so June of 2019. However, the protests actually continued. They have about 4 points as to why they're still protesting. So number one, they want the government, the Hong Kong government, to formally withdraw the bill as opposed to simply shelving it. So Carrie Lam is saying, look, we got rid of the bill. The Hong Kong protesters are saying, well, hold on a second. We don't think you actually got rid of it. What we think you did is you just took the bill. You're going to vote on it later when everything settles. We want you to permanently get rid of it so you never have the opportunity to be able to get this bill through again. Number 2, launch an independent inquiry on police behavior. I'll get into that. Number 3, amnesty for those arrested, which is roughly about 1,300 people. Number 4, democratic reform to give Hong Kong residents universal suffrage, so the right to vote. Right now, there's 2,000 people that are allowed to vote. Would you like to know the amount of citizens who live in Hong Kong? 7.39 million. That means that literally 0.03% of the population can actually vote. Oftentimes, those are also pro-Beijing supporters. And so the people themselves don't have the opportunity to vote on government. So let's go all the way back to the protests here. So there's 1,300 people that have been arrested, like I had said, and there's been over 900 protests so far, and it's counting already. In terms of police brutality, Amnesty International claims the situation could have been uglier behind closed doors, because we don't know, accusing police of committing assaults in custody that amount to torture. For example, one man who was arrested at a protest in August told Amnesty that after he refused to answer a question, officers took him into a separate room and beat him severely, threatening to break his hands if he tried to shield himself from their blows. Quote, "One flipped me over and put his knees on my chest. I felt the pain in my bones and couldn't breathe," the man said. An officer then pried open his eyes and shone a laser pointer into them. He was hospitalized for several weeks with a bone fracture and internal bleeding. Hong Kong is still continuing protests until they're able to receive more autonomy from China. Jesus, guys, that's pretty bad. Now, I get it. This is only one case study as opposed to many issues that had happened. Some of the protesters aren't completely innocent as well. But look, there's countless examples of this very thing. You can even look at videos. They're everywhere. Actually, maybe you shouldn't because it's pretty graphic and you might not want that sort of emotional trauma. You're gonna have to trust me on this unless you wanna go check it out for yourself. The point here is that this is a very ugly scene and the police, as professionals, should not be treating its citizens like this. That isn't something that we should even have a conversation about. Now, as a recent response, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, said that Beijing will, quote, resolutely safeguard the prosperity and stability of Hong Kong under the so-called, quote, one country, two systems framework, granting the city a high degree of autonomy under Chinese rule. Now, this policy is very similar to what they're doing in other areas like Xinjiang with the Uyghurs or Tibet with the Tibetans like the Dalai Lama. However, the Hong Kong protesters are continuing their protest because for them, it's all or nothing. Either we are going to be under Chinese rule forever or we're gonna make a stand right now. And that's what this situation is really about. So we'll find out what happens in the upcoming months. I am very curious to see. I think there's really two things that we can expect here. Either one, the protesters will stop, or two, the Chinese government will play more of a direct role. I feel like it's either gonna be one or the other. Granted, the answer is probably gonna be somewhere in the middle, unfortunately. I thought it'd be a little bit more clear and concise for all of us. However, I would like to see which one comes first. I'm not even gonna bother making a prediction on this one. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening to everything that I have to say. If you guys liked it, please give it a like and a subscribe. If you'd like to comment on this as well, I would appreciate it. If you're watching this on television, thank you as well. My Twitter and Facebook is @ZachMoss6, Instagram, the Zach of Zachs. Anyway, guys, have a good day, live long, don't prosper, because there are too many kids on this planet.